saying for Mikra Kodesh, that also brings us up. I'll introduce this with a mashal. Let's say, we knock kaparas every single year, so we're not going to do that now. But let's say you had one of these people from the Hasidim who decides, okay, they're going to do kaparas. They're in one of those places where everybody lines up early in the morning, right? They daven vasik and they go to mikvah, and then everybody gets his chicken. They line up to go do kaparas, Erev Yom Kippur. And he starts asking shilas like, why are we doing this mitzvah? If, it reeks of shchitas chutz, and it's very korban-like in its aspect, and also it's done in the wrong place, and it's with the chicken, which is not something that we usually do. When we say it's kapara, he brings up all the kashas that people could have to explain why you shouldn't do kaparas, and he says, so why is it we have a mitzvah to do this if it's so difficult? And the answer we tell him is, Chacham, now you understand why it is that the greatest poskim throughout the history have tried to put an end to this minhag. Because it's not a mitzvah. The Chazal never said to do such a thing. The Torah never said to do such a thing. People started doing it, and there are people trying to put a stop to it, trying to convince people of the wrongness, if I can use that word, the wrongacity of doing such a thing. Okay, so sometimes maybe your assumptions, maybe you've been told something, it's just completely wrong. So this is for the guys who are at home who have been following this until now. This is a common halacha sefer called Mikra Kodesh. We have like 3 copies of Mikra Kodesh, what to do on Pesach and Leil HaSeder. Have you seen it? And this is something I addressed on Chol Moed Pesach this year with the guys. And that was the fundamental assumption that everybody makes, that you have to start your Seder after nightfall. And I brought what I hope is quite a lot of arguments that I couldn't bring to the author, but quite a lot of arguments that indeed the Tosafists held that way. And the Shulchan Aruch is machmir that way. But Ikar Adin, according to the halachic traditions that existed before the Tosafists said this, and certainly from their contemporaries, there is no such hakpada. And beyond that, people start realizing this when we actually have Korban Pesach. It's an explicit verse in the Torah, as brought by the Gemara and the Midrashei Halacha, that when are you supposed to eat Korban Pesach? When is the first time you can eat Korban Pesach? The evening of Passover. What does it say in the pasuk? At sundown. At Shkia, you could eat your Korban Pesach. And Chazal were aware of this. Chazal were the ones saying that's the pshat in the pasuk. And Chazal were the ones who said that you have to have Kiddush beforehand. And the Chazal assumed that if you're doing the Seder the right way, you will eat the matzah and maror before you eat the Korban Pesach. Right? So those are before, technically speaking, those are before Shkia. And you could do Magid before Shkia. I was trying to tell him this, but his entire assumption in that book is, he doesn't even go into this. Is this assumption correct? He never examined the assumption. He never brought the proof to it. It says it's one line in Tosfos that fits that understanding Gemara, but we saw that in the Rambam and others. That's not the way it is. And we saw that there's a key Vilna Gaon where he points this out. Just in Remez, but you see, like, you put it all together, it's like, oh, the Vilna Gaon's saying the Rambam's correct in this understanding of the whole sugya, and it totally destroys what the Tosfos are saying. Okay, so what are you going to do? So let me share this on the screen. You'll understand my frustration in following a major halacha book like this. If you're reading a modern-day halacha book, I compare this to, let's say, eating processed foods. Okay? There's someone who's, they're selling now vitamin pills. Instead of eating your vegetables and getting your vitamins, what do they tell you could do? They could like crunch up the vegetables or something, and they just extract all the nutrients, and they could just take pills, right? Now, this is a variation of the same fallacy that people have discovered recently. That is, they said, oh, you need vitamin C. You do need vitamin C. You'll get scurvy, terrible diseases if you don't eat something called vitamin C. Okay? Vitamin C, also known as ascorbic acid, if I'm not mistaken. Okay? You need vitamin C in your diet, or you'll get sick. Now, so they came up with this idea that you can take a pill full of vitamin C. And you know what they discovered? It doesn't work that well. Yes, it'll give you 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, all the vitamin C you need every single day, maybe for a few days. What happens when you put in the pill and you digest it? Your kidneys have fun with it. It flushes it all out very quickly. The bioavailability and the absorbability of many nutrients and vitamins is not only not increased by, let's say, extracting it from the food and then processing and then putting it into, let's say, the bamba, right? Bamba is not a food. Bamba's packing peanuts with flavor, right? But they say they put vitamins back into it. You're not getting much of those vitamins from it. Turns out your digestive system, in order to get the nutrients, needs the vegetable. It's not the vitamins in the vegetable or the nutrients in the vegetable. It's the vegetables. Or take the sugar from the apples. We have a pile of apples over there, right? You could extract all the different vitamins and nutrients that are in the apples, the different types of sugars and the acids, the vitamins, right? And put in a pill. And the guy eating an apple, just a few bites of an apple, will get a lot more than the guy who takes a few of these pills. You know why? Because the delivery system, the digestion of that actual apple with all its other pieces is what helps the body absorb and use the nutrients. So instead of, let's say, studying Tanakh and Talmud and perhaps sources that explain the Talmud to you, like Rishonim, and understanding the Torah in a nice, wholesome, healthy manner, instead you take modern-day halacha books, which present you bottom lines and their understandings of things, and you don't know what the actual sources say. That's like eating, a fruit roll-up instead of eating an apple, a fruit roll-up with a vitamin pill, because you don't know what you're missing, and you're not getting it right. You don't hear it in the original words. You don't know the sources for it. You haven't checked it. So I think Kal V'chomer, if you're learning modern-day so-called halacha books in English, you want to learn Hilchos Shabbos. How you guys learn? Oh, Hilchos Kashrus. So what do you learn for Kashrus? You're using a Torah and a Shulchan Aruch, which is good. Maybe you'll check what it says in Chulin and all that. But some people open up an English book that says Kashrus for the kitchen or something like that, and they just say, here it is, very clear, like we mentioned the ice cube case. I opened up a halacha book. It says I'm not allowed to make ice cubes on Shabbos. That's it. Okay. Is there any Gemaras about that? Do you know why that is the case? Do you know that actually is major authorities who said it's perfectly permissible, and you're not going to find a Talmud discussion that says it's forbidden? You know that, right? We discussed this issue. I know you're arguing against it now, but can you show me in the Talmud where it discusses making ice cubes on Shabbos? Good. So you probably saw a book that tells you it's forbidden, right? Can't make ice cubes on Shabbos. What did Rabbi Moshe Feinstein say? Yeah, sure. Okay. So that's what learning these sources is like, and I'll explain it. So this shows the frustration as we come to Rosh Hashanah. Last week we were discussing imposing halacha. Okay, so the desired imposition was, we're going to put a stop to people saying slichas before midnight, right? I thought that's pretty mean, because there are people that have a tradition that allows for such a thing, and there's nothing Talmudic about it, and the whole idea is first introduced in late 16th century Kabbalah. So how can you say it's such a terrible thing? But they want to impose on it. This whole idea that you have to sound 100 shofar blasts, thank God, is not something you could find in any halacha book until this point, saying you have to do it. Anybody who does it is Kotzeitz Benetios or Kofer or Grossman or something like that. However, it does exist. It exists in Kochav Yaakov, or has existed. Okay, there are people who are fooled into this. But this sefer is actually getting dangerously close to a misconception, actually making the misconception concretized, like actually putting it in there in the record. Here's what it says: Av shemikar din dai lishma b'chol yom mimei Rosh Hashanah shloshim tikiyot elu, or ela. Okay, it's actually ikra din. You could just hear these 30 kolos, right? That's what Gemara says, 30 kolos, and then I'll say the brachos. You have to add 10 more. Total 40 or 42 if you're Rabbeinu Tam. Mikol makom nahagu Ashkenazim lishma mea tikiyot b'chol yom. The Ashkenazim have a minute to hear it 100 blasts each of those 2 days. Interesting. I thought it was a Sephardic minhag or Hasidish. Actually started among Hasidim first. The Ashkenazim. The Sephardim here are 101. By the way, what's the Shulchan Aruch's opinion? 40. Mikar din 40. He allows for 60 or 61. Okay, that's just Beis Yosef. Shulchan Aruch makes no mention of anything beyond this. Yeah. No. Well, you should daven musaf, because you heard 30 tekiyos. If you start the tekiyos, you should daven musaf and hear the tekiyos al seder habrachos. Remember, you should have eaten before. Remember, an hour ago, you should have eaten before you started sounding shofar. Before you started shofar, you can eat before shofar. No, you can't. You just can't have a suda. Okay, but once you start the shofar blowing, you can eat before musaf. If you started shofar blowing, You don't want to interrupt your shofar blowing now until you finish Musaf because you have to connect the 30 tkios with the blast during the Shemon Esrei. Because you're supposed to hear it, you're chayav to hear it all Seder Brachos. Okay? Next. So here's his footnote. It says these things. Okay? Now, here's his footnote. He didn't bring until this point, any discussion, which I'm surprised about, any discussion of what you'll find starting in that Tosfos, the long one, which I mentioned at the end of Rosh Hashanah, where it actually says how this halacha comes into play. How do you hear 30 tekiyos and then all Seder ha-brachos? If you follow all the usual halachic sources, you'll find that they all discuss, is it 10 more with the brachos or 12 more? And that's what you have up until basically the modern era. That's what all the poskim discuss. Basically, the machlok is it 40 or 42? And we have a chart about this. So here's what he wrote. This whole thing that we sound 100 or 101. Okay? It's somehow, it counteracts the 100 wailings that Sisra's mom wailed. You heard such a thing, right? Isn't that what Chazal say? No, it's not what Chazal say. No, it's not. Okay? And by the way, what does Aim Sisra have to do with this? There is a Gemara that says, what does Yevava mean? Okay, when they say in Aramaic, is it Yelula Yalal or Yevuva Yevava, right? So what does that word, where do those words even mean? Do they have Hebrew equivalents? Right? So there they do, yes. They do mention that Aim Sisra was Watiyabev. She was wailing in a certain way. And they look at the Targum, the what does that Targum mean? So you actually have Yevava technically has a precedence in Hebrew. Okay? So but that's all they use, just like because the verb is there. But it doesn't tell you when you sound the shofar, there's connection between Sistra's mom and what we do on Rosh Hashanah. By the way, for today, you should know that that's what Deborah's song is about. At the very end of the song, they're basically mocking Sistra's mother. Boo-hoo, she's crying. Her boy's not coming home no more because he was blown up by a missile right through his window or his pager or something like that. And then how does her song conclude? Kain yovedu chol yavecha Hashem. So too shall all of God's enemies go lost. Okay? That's we hope. Same thing happens to Sisra's mother and everybody else. We're just watching day in, day out. It should happen to all of them. Okay. Uchmoshe nizkar, well, Koshe nichtav, be'ara chalonish kafa wat yabev im Sisera. Okay? We learned this because the 100 blasts come from this pasuk somehow. Sisera's mom was crying. Okay? And now he's going to ask a kasha. Listen to these kashas over here, which he puts in the parentheses. Okay? I'm going to ask a kasha on all this. One, harei tkiyah shofar midoraisa. Tkiyah shofar is a biblical commandment. How do they know what to do and how do they know what to do? Okay? How to sound the shofar? Is it a yabava, like a shavarm true or shvarm, whatever it is, until Sisera was killed. By the way, how soon after Matan Torah was Sisera killed? I wouldn't say even maybe 200 years, right? It says the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, and then there was oppression of Kushan Rishasayim after the death of Yoshua, and the 80 years of that was from Ehud taking over after Moab oppressed the Jewish people, and then there's basically brings us to the time of Devorah. Okay, she was the third major shofet. All these times before we even had this pasuk Vatyabev and teaching us what it means, a certain type of wailing, how they sound the shofar before we learned it from Sisera's mom. Next, what did Sisera's mother do that we learned from her how to keep this mitzvah doraisa? 3. Okay, why do we have to learn what Yevava means from Sisera's mom? Which means that this previous question was talking about the way to do it. 100 blasts from her, what she did. He's asking kashas on this midrashic idea. Before this pasuk was there in Tanakh, did they not know what this word meant? Okay. Everybody knows what Yevava should mean. 4. Ma kesher bein Sisera levein Rosh Hashanah. And what's the connection between Sisera and his mom and Rosh Hashanah? Now, someone in TV land, please tell me why at least do I feel that these questions are not worthy? What's the real answer? The real answer is Chazal never connected Sisera to Sisera and his mother to Tikiyah Shofar. I'm not going into the answer because the answer is based. The assumption is wrong. Where does Aim Sisera come into this? The only time Chazal mentioned Aim Sisera is she was crying, and we learned what the word means, but it doesn't teach us how to sound the shofar. The inyan of sounding shofar doesn't occur there in the halachic tradition. Where does it occur? And this is saying that you also, that's why I said, go back to the Svarim and read them. If you read Tosfos there, and the Tur, and the Rush, and the Rambam, and the Beis Yosef after them, and the Psak of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Chayodam, and the Vilna Gaon, and Rabbeinu Tam, they all look at the Gemara and they're talking about the 40 or the 42 blasts, and is there an interruption between Shavarim and Trua, and what's the better way to do it? Once you sound Malchios, everybody says there's a Tashrat with it. But with Zichronos and Shofros, is it just also a Tashrat here and a Tashrat there, or Tashat and Tarat? What's better? What accomplishes more? And should you take a breath in between? That's an actual halachic discussion that's there in the Gemara. And in passing, Tosafos mentioned there that the Aruch says this idea of Sisera's mom. That is, Sisera's mom cried 100 times, and you also have to sound the shofar 100 times. And you also have to sound shofar during the silent Shemona Esrei, which is a real head scratcher to all the Rishonim and Achronim who just mentioned this in passing. No one held of this idea. The connection between Sisera's mothers and how she cried 100 times, and you have to counteract it. And by the way, that whole thing with sounding the shofar during silent Shemona Esrei is rejected by whom? Everybody. The Shulchan Aruch himself never held of such a thing. The Mishnah Berurah mentions, like the Pri Megadim, if you never had a minhag to sound the shofar during silent Shemona Esrei, don't adopt it. It's not right. Chazal talked about sounding the shofar with the brachos bechever ear. It's either chazar sashatz or one Shemona Esrei in place of the silent Shemona Esrei. Chazan just picks up right then and there and tries to discharge everybody else's obligation. This idea, the 100 blasts idea, until the Ari picked it up and made a big Torah about it, that the 3 sets of 30 counteract the 3 major avodah zaras, like we saw last year. Sorry, the 3 major yetzer haras, one against avodah zara, one against gila raus, one against shvichus damim. So you have to have 30 blasts, 3 series of 30, one to miyoshev, one to chazar sashatz, one in silent Shemona Esrei. This idea was a halachic anomaly. It was a curiosity. It's something mentioned in places in passing, but it was never the halacha. And this whole idea that she cried 100 times, and that's why you have to sound shofar 100 times, is a head scratcher in Tosfos. They're saying that the Aruch says that, but Chazal never said such a thing. No one ever made that assumption. Like the Vilna Gaon says, Rabbeinu Tam is the Iker, 42 blasts. Oh, what about Aim Sisera 100 and sounding it 100 times? No such tradition. That's why I compared this to the fellow who was scratching his head when it came to time to do kaparas. Suddenly he realizes this whole kaparas thing is very problematic. So why do we have a mitzvah to do it? Now, like I say, Boker Tov Eliyahu, we never had a mitzvah to do kaparas, and they've always been telling you not to. So if you're asking all these kashas against why is it that there's such a connection between shofar blowing and Sisera's mother, it's because there never was a connection. Lo hayav lo nivra, until around, like we said, they came up with Shar Kavanos, which was like last year in the late 1500s, early 1600s. The Shla, who we said was an old, survived, he lived after Rabbi Chaim Vidal, who wrote the Shar Kavanos, elaborated on how to accomplish this new minhag, which he says we started doing in Jerusalem. The Shla lived, we said, his last 10 years in Eretz Yisrael. He lived to a ripe old age. All those years he was in Europe, the Ashkenazim never did a thing like that. It's not attested to. It was a creation in his days. And how to do it. And he says, here are the kavanas. You ever see in the Shla? He says the tzerufim and all that. And then he mentions, you don't have to do it this way. You could stick to doing the old way, the old 40 blasts. Okay, so these things, and these, like I said, these are all post-Shulchan Aruch things. You're going to ask the Shulchan Aruch about this. Shulchan Aruch would say, the Aruch says this difficult aim sister thing, which was never really considered seriously by halacha. Yeah, there were maybe in Italy we did it like the Aruch, but this wasn't the minhag of Klal Yisrael. So why is it saying the storm? And if you want, we could open up files here. We have now databases like Hebrew books and other online databases of PDFs, pictures of all the old machzorim from previous generations. Some are manuscript because before the printing press, having written book was a real deal, especially in what is Machzor from Europe, Ashkenazic places. They did not have 100 blasts; they had 42, and before Rabbeinu Tam, everybody had 40. And once you get to Rabbeinu Tam, you basically have in Europe it's 42, elsewhere it's 40. Why? Because it says minag shtei yeshivos. What's shtei yeshivos? The major yeshivas that persisted in Bavel throughout the time of the Gaonim, where the Gaonim were. They had 40 blasts, and that's what the Rambam says. That's what the Rif described. That's what they used to do. And the Shulchan Aruch held of what the Rambam did, and mentions a difficult minhag to just triple the blasts in Shemon Esrei. Tashrat, tashrat, tashrat after Malchios, and tashat, tashat, tashrat after Shofros, and tarat, tarat, tarat after Zechronos. Or maybe I got it backwards. Okay. The point is he triples it, and they ask him, "Why are you doubling the tashrats after Malchios? What tripling it? What are you accomplishing?" He mentions this as a minhag. It's not the Ikar Adin. It's the difficult minhag he mentioned. But not every time the Shulchan Aruch mentions a minhag after telling you what the din is, did he mean, yeah, and do this is the din? It's obviously not. So, like I said, his kashas here are nishta kashya. It means you have to go back to the source. You realize whatever. It's like asking kashas now. Give another mashal on that whole thing. If we stay up all Shavuos night, how are we supposed to even wash our hands and say brachos in the morning? And how are we supposed to accomplish Simchas Yontif and Chelkehu, Chetziul Hashem, Chetziul Lachem on Yontif Day if we're all exhausted and all that? Right? So all these kashas. So how could they give us a mitzvah of staying up? How could they tell us? How could Chazal tell us to stay up all night on Shavuos? Answer: even up until the 1600s, no one had a Havamina. You should stay up all night on Shavuos. never was a thing. Lo hayav lo nivra. Well, it's I imagine for many people it is fun. I'm just saying to ask halachic questions about why are we doing this. It's like, oh, because you weren't supposed to do this. You go shave your head. You can do whatever you want with your hair. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. We discussed that because of prima nocte. Let's go back into the Rambam. Is there a question there? I heard someone ask a question. Yeah.
Yes, it's like tashlich, and when people start asking about feeding animals and all of
Yeah,
that.
all the shilas on Tashlich, yeah. Well, at least like the rabbi said 2 years ago, kaparas is addressed by the Rishonim. It's in the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, and it says you shouldn't do it. Tashlich isn't even in most of the majors. It didn't make it even into the things. Most people didn't hear such a thing. Where are the problems with Tashlich? Tchum, okay? Feeding fish, tachanunim on Yontif. Whole host of problems. And also the Avodah Zarah aspect of it. Why are you trying to bribe the fish? Like many people have pointed out. So you say, well, so why are we doing this? The answer is you weren't supposed to do it. And if you were on top of it, you know that there are many throughout the ages who said we shouldn't be doing this. The Vilna Gaon didn't do it. You don't throw breadcrumbs in? If you go to a place where there are fish and you start throwing in breadcrumbs, the fish will start eating them. Nobody throws breadcrumbs? You didn't grow up in Chutz La'aretz, because that's what they do,